When we talk about the Enneagram, we often think of it as just a symbol of typology, but it's actually a system for adult development. And it encompasses three things, like in a triangle. It encompasses the psychological, the spiritual, and the biological. It's easy to forget how much these three things are interrelated, interconnected. What we think, what we believe shows up in our bodies and adds to how we feel disconnected from spirit. So, in this conversation with Elle Pugh, I was really excited to focus on the biological, the biology. She is a registered nurse, started her working life as an ICU nurse before focusing on healthcare and other avenues. But she's really dived into the neuroscience and the internal biology that sits behind the Enneagram and supports what it teaches us. Ellie is a certified Enneagram facilitator and coach dedicated to holistic wellness and personal growth. Now, we're both seven, so the conversation does meander and wander a bit, but we do cover all of it, just not always in the most structured fashion. We talk about the three centers of intelligence, how they show up in our brain and in our three centers and in our body. We talk about how they show up in our educational systems, in our workplace. We talk about what the healthy use of each center is and the unhealthy use of each center, whether it's your dominant center or not. We talk about dominant centers and how to work on aligning your centers, opening up the centers that you don't necessarily use on a regular basis, and using that as a platform for inner growth and for healing. It was a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciated the depth and the insight and the wisdom that Ellie brought and her teaching style. I think she's a really great teacher. You can check her out at Beyond Your Type. I'll put links below. Enjoy. So, the centers of intelligence. Tell me, why does this topic interest you so much?
Well, okay, so as a nurse, I mean, one of my passions is connecting the science behind like what backs this Enneagram theory
Mm-hmm.
to really like connect the dots, I think, particularly as a head type, right? Like I like the visual and understand what we're talking about. And I also, as a head type can stay in the like ethereal thinking, esoteric thinking. But in order to give people something to really understand, like, hey, this is not, I think I worry about judgment of too woo woo, right? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's talk about all of the science and the
Mm-hmm.
biology and the neuroscience that backs literally every component of the Enneagram framework. And so that's when I can really nerd out when I like go into my research about what's the science that backs this up.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about that science in just a second. But I can't help but just notice I asked you a very head-centered question. I said, what interests you about it? So now I'm going to ask you a heart question. How do you feel about the center's intelligence?
How do I feel about I feel that understanding that we are three brain beings um, is it opens up, honestly, for a head type, it opens up my heart to be able to listen, and connect with these other brains that I have besides just my thinking brain, my
Mm.
feeling brain, and my gut brain. And um, I feel honestly comforted by the fact that, oh, I can use this knowledge to guide me into a deeper knowing and find balance and health through integrating and listening to my other non-dominant centers.
And I've discovered as I've gone into the body more and more, just how much wisdom and just so much held in the soma in the body. And the soma has a broad meaning, which I'm sure we'll get to, but just there's so much there. And because I'm a head type, my ego used to say everything I needed was in the head. And I've realized that's just not true.
Yeah.
There is so much in the body and so much in the heart that can guide us and ground us and be everything that we need, that we really need all three centers working
Yeah.
together rather than the head know-it-alls approach to life.
Yeah. Yeah. Another feeling I honestly, what just came up as you're talking about this is a little bit of grief.
Mm,
Because as a head type, as I learned about the heart center and the body center and the body knowing, you know, every time you learn something new about the Enneagram, you begin to you rewind your life and you think, oh, gosh, all those moments I would have done differently, even like playing sports, right? As a head type,
mm,
I approached sports with my head
mm,
and so would get all frozen up in my head instead of trusting my body that it knew exactly what to do, like get out of my head and move into my body. So
mm.
there's some grief around it as well. You know,
Yeah.
missed moments of connection with my heart with people because I was trying to logic my way out of a situation when
Mm,
there was no that was the wrong use, the wrong
yeah.
center to be using, you know.
I completely feel you. I've got a lot of missed connections because my heart center wasn't online or wasn't a safe place or just, wasn't familiar as yet. I think that's still a
Yeah,
work in progress, especially for us sevens being so far away from the heart center.
they've worked
So
so hard.
let's start with the science side of it. Let's talk about the three brains, why we have three brains, what they are, what all that means, and then let's link that over to the Enneagram Center of Intelligence.
Okay, so really the way I teach it is we have two models of these three brains. So we have these three intelligence centers within our brain structure that mirror the Enneagram centers of intelligence. Really, I guess Gurdjieff is the one who really brought forward these three centers, and then the Enneagram is forth even more. But um, the gut center being equivalent to our brain stem. Okay, so it's the fight or flight. It's what makes us move into action. And then the limbic system is the emotional brain. It's where our memories and emotions, um, dreams, and purpose making lives. And then our neocortex, which is our thinking brain or our rational brains, where we make logical sense of things. We use it for deductive reasoning and planning. So those are the three structures that correlate to the three centers of intelligence in our brain. But then we also have our brain, which has 86 billion neurons, okay, a complex neural network. But we have our heart brain that
Mm,
has its own separate complex neural network with 40,000 neurons. Then our gut brain has 100 million neurons. And research has shown us that our gut actually sends 400 times the messages to the brain than the brain to the gut. And the heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain does to the
mm,
heart. And as a head type, and I think as a collective culture, we are dominant in our in head orientation and like we just pay way too much attention to our head. That knowledge gives credence to the power
mm,
that exists in this heart brain and in our gut brain.
mm,
And I've nerded out on this, I've learned about, okay, so when did emotional intelligence, that term, come on to the scene? That was in the 90s. So what we've had about 30 years of trying to bring up collectively, like what is emotional intelligence? So heart knowing, we still have so
mm,
much ground to cover there. And then I feel like only recently have we begun to kind of bring back intuition and body knowing and trusting that knowledge and wisdom. Now I'll say, I don't know when the switch happened, but long ago, and actually as our brains developed, it started with the intuition. Then we developed our emotional brain, and then we developed our thinking brain. So for forever, we've had that intuition, and over time, we've just repressed or devalued the intuition knowing. I've been reading a lot about energy medicine, and that's like coming on scene. And, I'm really passionate about women's health. And there's this big movement of women like, going to the doctor and saying, no, I know something is wrong.
Mm.
And women trying to find their voice and saying, I'm listening to my body, and I have an intuition that
Mm.
something is wrong here. But our head society, right, like backed by evidence-based data and logical thinking, says nothing's wrong with you. So I think it's very important for us to understand, I mean, scientifically, what backs the theory of the centers of intelligence.
Mm. I first learned about the three brains, the head brain, like the heart brain and the gut brain, like maybe 10 years ago when I read this book, Braining. And I think that stands for multiple brains. And it just really shifted my whole idea of how I worked internally because it talked about how each of these brains operates independently and they can make decisions for you that the head brain has nothing to do with. And that just rocked my world. I mean, there was one day when I was at work, I was leaving work for the day, and I was going off to do something that obviously some part of me wasn't on board with. And I was walking along the pavement, and all of a sudden, my whole lower body froze. My legs literally froze, and the top half of my body flung forward from the motion because I was walking. And I burst into laughter because I knew this was a different brain making this decision for me. And it was
Yes.
just this moment that stood out so powerfully of there's so many parts of us that are having a say, even if we're not aware of them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like where do we think these terms of trust our gut, follow your heart, and use your head came from?
Mm.
Like there's meaning behind those phrases.
I hadn't made the connection between the layers in the brain before in each of the centers. So I think that's useful. And then what about the vagus nerve? I've been hearing more and more about that lately in its role, but I'm not sure. Does it fit in here or not?
Yeah, it really does. And I will admit, like, I'm kind of a newbie in learning more about polyvagal theory, but when we get stressed, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated, and then physiologically things happen in our all throughout our body.
Mm.
Right? And that just causes us to stay in this low grade stress. But eventually, when we talk about kind of integrating all three centers, well, how we can integrate all three centers is actually stimulating the vagus nerve, which can calm us down. And we can do this through breath work and yoga. And this is the way that we can visualize tapping into our heart, tapping into our gut, and bringing into balance these three centers, which is what I would say is the goal. The goal of
Mm.
all of this inner work to increase our quality of life and improve our health and vitality is balance and homeostasis.
And so I'm curious, as we start to move more into the centers of intelligence model, like what would we say is a healthy use of each center? Because the Enneagram tells us we have a dominant center. We live in a society that is very head centric, it's very evidence based.
You and I are head types, right? It's really hard to reason with a head type if they think they're certain, right? Data proves that this is true, right? And so I think from a collective, we also are kind of fighting this uphill battle because collectively we are dominated by that head logical thinking, and haven't given credence to the heart and the gut. But I would say, that the the work is to learn to when to draw on which center. I feel like based on a given situation, what center is going to best help me move through this in a way that is like, okay, calm, confident, connected, like efficient, clear. And so I'll give you some examples. So for the head, I mean, when we are needing to look at objectivity, is this true in the sense of, can I look at the data and draw some conclusions here? that can be helpful, particularly for an emotional, heart-centered person. Looking at the data, like, is what I'm feeling now, I'm not trying to logic someone's way out of feeling something, but if we get stuck in that rumination of feelings, can I draw up to the head center to look at the facts, right? And look at the trends and to say, is this true? If it might be like, I'm defective. Okay, well, let's look at the data to try to help pull you out of that hurt space. But also doing head work, like running spreadsheets, trying to build a process, deductive reasoning, planning, like detailed reports or detailed emails, and to know that we need to energetically move energy and breath up to the headspace to draw on the gifts of the head center. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think
What else would you add to that?
well, I was thinking one thought that came up is it sounded very much like Byron Katie's work. Of when you talked about the heart type, is this
Yes,
true?
yes.
It sounded very like a heart's approach to using the head to create
Yeah,
some sort of objectivity in those situations. But it also got me thinking, even for head types, and obviously we're sevens, but I was thinking, well, when you're budgeting and you're looking at the numbers of how much you spent on entertainment and you're telling
yeah,
yourself it's okay, that's not necessarily a great use of the head center because we're just rationalizing, well, we needed that much fun. But if we were able to step back and be objective and use the head center well, we'd go, that was a bit excessive. We
yeah,
might need to put some more of that into savings, you know?
exactly.
And so even head centers aren't necessarily using the head center well.
No, exactly. And I think the precursor to all of this is knowing, and we'll get into this, but what is my dominant center based on,
Mm.
the wisdom of the Enneagram, and to bring that awareness to your consciousness to say, okay, well, if I am head center dominant, then I know I'm going to over index and try to use my head center for every situation. And so I need to bring awareness to that, just could just have that knowing,
Mm.
and then intentionally figure out, all right, what's the current situation and what energy do I need to be, what center do I need to be drawing on?
Yeah, and so loosely speaking, the head center is for anything time we need sort of risk assessments and analysis and objectivity. The heart
Yes.
center for relating to others in obviously there's a myriad of forms that can take. And then the body center is partly instinctive. It's that doing, taking consistent, clear action and direct action, not getting sidetracked. There is also a gut knowing that happens there as well.
Yeah. The other thing that's really fascinating about the body center is, even for translation, that's a body
Mm.
activity, because we have the wisdom, we have the knowledge within our body. We don't need to be thinking about it. We need to trust the wisdom of our body. Same
Mm.
with sports or learning. Like, once we've learned something, our body network knows it, and it's leaning into trusting it to do its job rather than thinking about it. And so, like, when I teach someone how to sleep who is a head type, I tell them to move energetically down into their body and tell their mind, it's okay. My body knows what to do. It
Mm.
knows how to go to sleep, and say, my body's going to take care of me. And it is wild. It worked for me and it works for all of my clients. And yeah, so the heart center, we should be using the heart whenever we are with another individual. It's
Outrageous. How
plain,
dare you
it's,
suggest such a
yeah,
thing?
it's as plain and simple as that. If we would all just move to that heart space,
Mm.
and we actually know that we can sync our heart rhythms up with another individual, even without touching them. Yes, holding hands helps,
Mm.
but orienting your body to another's heart, looking in their eyes, saying words of affirmation, moments of connection, that is how we truly connect. And that is like the most vital thing we need for our survival,
Mm.
is to connect with others, to move close to them emotionally and physically. And so that's just one thing I think about, is when we are with another individual, it is moving energy to your heart and feeling that heartbeat and connecting with that person. And that's going to just deepen the intimacy and connection like more than you can ever imagine.
Mm. And just to go back to the body center for a second, just to clarify translation, you're
Yeah.
meaning when someone's translating another language.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so it needs to come from the body. So it's sort of almost instinctive as opposed from the
Mm-hmm.
head where you think about, okay, this is how I translate it. It's actually slower. The head is actually a lot slower than the body center. That
Exactly.
instinctiveness works really quickly. And that the other thing is about driving. We should drive with the instincts of the body center rather
Uh-huh.
than the emotionality or the planning of the other centers.
When Uranio shared that, I thought I started dying laughing because as a head type, I'm always anxious. And if I'm in the passenger seat, I'm worried what my husband is doing. And I'm always gasping because I think he doesn't see the brake lights. And he is a heart type and he drives with his heart. He is so pissed off at this person and this person. It's all about his relation to the people, the other drivers on the road and how they are, like ruining his day. Rather than just, oh, we could both just lean into our bodies and trust that our body knows when to speed up and slow down, and it's all going to be fine.
That's hilarious. You just reminded me that when I was younger, I'd always play the navigator on road trips. I'd have the maps and then I would craft exactly when I needed to tell you where to turn and how much notice you needed and what lane you needed to be in. Let's shift into the centers. What is a dominant center? What types belong to each? And then how we can start to create more balance between them.
So there's three Enneagram numbers or points within each center. So in the gut center, 891, the heart center, 234, and then the head center, 567. And what we just believe to be true in the Enneagram theory is that wherever you fall, where your number is and what center you fall in, you tend to predominantly use that center as you move through life and really kind of repress or disconnect from these other centers. And what else would you add to that?
I don't think we appreciate how much the dominant center steals energy from the other centers until much later in life.
Yes.
Our educational systems are very head centric, which means a lot of body centers struggle in the current educational system. They do better at more practical educational systems. So they might get tarnished as being school dropouts or not being able to focus. And yet it's because the educational system isn't designed to suit them. And no one
Right.
really understands or appreciates that. And I think it's such a shift to understand why we need different forms of educational systems for kids of different types. And why some kids want to sit down and collaborate and work together all day, and why some kids want to go in the library and just work on their own and not speak to anyone, and why someone needs to go build something,
Yeah.
and it's how do we support all forms because we can take a lot of personal judgment and self-esteem hits in those really crucial educational years from not even understanding that.
Yeah. And then we grow up and we're in the workplace, right? So you've got this team of 25 individuals and we have three different groups and how they show up and need to be coached and led. So in a meeting per se, or if you are coaching, or I like to use coaching instead of managing, but managing an employee and you tell a head type, I need you to do this. And you don't tell them why, they will not do it. Or if they do, it will be begrudgingly and delayed and drawn out, and they'll need to go figure out why before they start. And I think the way that most head types like to learn is let me go research and understand this before I start. That
Mm.
makes me feel safe and secure before I begin. Whereas a heart type, okay, if you're managing them, if you do not spend time emotionally connecting with them and developing a personal relationship with them, they will not work for you. They just aren't interested. But if you spend time developing rapport, you can almost get them to do anything. Okay. But then how I find that they like to learn is calling up someone who's done it before, right? Like you said, group projects. Let's work together on this. And so like it's that relational dynamic. And then the body type, well, you know, they don't care too much about why or the details. They also don't have the time to connect, right? A meeting that started 15 minutes ago, we're still talking about what everyone did on the weekend. They are so gone and they're off on the side doing other work. I find that gut types like to learn by doing. They want to get in there and they want to figure it out, trial and error. And so while those are like very broad, sweeping generalizations, I find that when I say that at the beginning of my workshops, everyone starts laughing because it's so absolutely true for them,
Mm.
And what would it be like? It's both, it's like this both and idea in all of this work. So if we know what we over index on, you can say, okay, well, this is important for me. I need to advocate for that. But also, a well balanced collective is really incorporating all three centers, right? Like you were saying, like, okay, research, not like learning, yes, cognitive learning, but relational learning as well. And and then the doing, the building. And if we had all three, if we were touching on all three centers, then we're teaching individuals how to use all three centers from a very young age.
Mm. So as we talk about reconnecting to the centers, I feel like there's two parts to this sort of healing equation in terms of acknowledging, accepting, and integrating some of those wounds, and then also growing to be able to connect into and use the centers in a more balanced way. And I don't know how you want to approach that. I just think it's important to name.
Yeah, I think it's so important. This is the lifelong work, the healing work, of first understanding the ways in which we turn off those non-dominant centers and why. For a heart center, like they've turned off that head for because of some sort of wounding. Maybe it was like you're not smart enough, or maybe someone's turned off their body from wounding around like not being athletic even. And I only know through my own experience of what it's like to wake up a non-dominant center, like truly to experience that. But in therapy, doing work like internal family systems work, and I do a similar type of work with my Enneagram clients where we begin to identify little thems, right? When we're doing soul child work, connecting with the little versions of them
Mm.
and beginning to help them to notice when we move to and we connect with this little part of you, and I say, what are they feeling? I can almost energetically sense when that client pulls themselves from their heart back up into their head and they're trying to draw an insight and tell
Mm.
me like why. And I
Mm.
say, no, 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 let's drop back down. And so it is a lot of somatic experiencing work, which is both body and heart focused. But I think it begins with this quiet work of having oftentimes take someone to co-regulate,
Mm.
to help you draw into these non-dominant centers and do a little bit of investigating. And even that self-reflection of self-inquiry, well, why did I learn to turn that center off?
Mm.
And can I create a sense of safety in my body to begin to trust these non-dominant centers that I have abandoned or rejected for quite some time?
Mm. I love how you've explained it in a way that just really acknowledges it's very gentle work, and we take our time with it, and we don't expect it to open up or heal overnight. It's something we just, do in a safe space until we're able to sit with it compassionately and just see, what happened at the time and how it wasn't, the full picture.
Yeah, yeah. And this is my theory
Okay.
is okay, if you're in a non-dominant center, perhaps you have more neural networks in that center. And so your path of least resistance, right? So that center gets more activated and you tend to get stuck in that center. Well, how do we build new neural networks? It's by moving our attention. It's first learning. We have to learn new knowledge. And then we can begin to practice and visualize moving to and gaining more knowledge by experiencing or feeling or that center and building new pathways so that it's easier to one sense when we are connected to that center,
Mm.
and two, to be able to actually access it more readily in the future.
And so what does that look like for the three centers?
Okay, so in accessing the head, it's a slower center, right? So I think that in all centers, it does take pausing and getting quiet, but also waking up, right? And this might confuse people, but our medial frontal cortex is at the front part of the brain. Okay, so our neocortex is back here, which is our kind of rational. And not to say that the prefrontal cortex isn't rational, but it is our watchtower. And so it is the place where we have consciousness and we can have that kind of bird's eye view or moving to our higher self and to observe what's going on. And so
Mm.
it does take that practice of pausing and practicing self observation to say, okay, what center is maybe overworking?
Mm.
And likely when we are stressed based on our non-dominant or our dominant center, if you're a gut type, when you're stressed, you're probably ruminating and doing,
Mm.
right? You're doing, doing, doing. When nines are stressed, they do with no real purpose, but they get lost, and so do eights and so do ones, right? As a way to try to regulate their system.
Mm.
But if they were to awaken to what's actually going on and realize that they're stuck in that dominant center, they can survey the situation and begin to ask, is this the correct center, the appropriate center for this given situation?
Mm.
So maybe they just had a fight with their spouse and they're trying to regulate and they're just cleaning the dishes, right? Saying, okay, this is actually not going to lead to the regulation that I need. I need to pause and possibly it might be that they first need to look at the data. Well, what really happened?
Mm.
And what am I feeling? Or what am I feeling? And sharing with their spouse
Mm.
what they're feeling instead of just trying to manage things, right? With the heart type, when they get stuck in their emotions, they begin to believe that their emotions are their reality. That should be a warning sign. Um, Trying to, or maybe perhaps they're trying to work, but they don't feel like it. Right? They're trying to approach their work through feeling instead of doing or thinking. And so it's pausing and noticing. Am I ruminating on my emotions because I'm stressed? I'm trying to regulate. What would it mean if I truly energetically visualized energy with breath moving to whichever center is going to be most useful for me right now? Or a head type getting stuck in analysis paralysis. A
Mm.
seven, all the options. A six, turning something up, like looking at it from every angle to try to know the the space to feel to find certainty and realizing, oh, I might not ever find certainty. So maybe right now I need to learn to tap into my gut and actually trust that gut knowing
Mm.
and move and take action. Um, or the five, burying themselves in research when they have a parent that's dying, right? Pouring themselves into a project instead of realizing it's time to pause and connect with their heart and let their emotions come out, no matter what they feel.
Mm.
Um, so that's what I feel like the process is. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I liked how you spoke about it as being regulating. So
Yeah.
when we're overdoing, overfeeling, and overthinking, it's actually the body's attempt to regulate itself. And I hadn't
Yes.
really seen it through that lens before. So that's fascinating because I think there are times when we're in our dominant center and we're using it really well and it feels really good.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we're overdoing it, we're really hoping to get back to the time when using that center feels really good, but we
Mm,
can't get it to go back there because you can't use the same, you solve the same problem that you got there with. And so it's
yeah.
really thinking, actually, I am stuck in overdoing. We can't get back. So I'm going to have to draw on other resources from other centers in order to help that regulation process to happen.
And it's this feedback loop. We've talked about this before. Like
Mm,
everything is intrinsically connected. So we have our behaviors and our beliefs of our like default operating network of our unconscious mind, our personality that drives the unconscious behavior. That could lead to nervous system deck if we are unaware and we
mm,
keep doing the thing that our mind thinks is the most efficient, and that will get us back to regulation, but it just it doesn't work anymore.
mm,
So it kind
mm,
of comes back to, okay, how do we kind of reverse the cycle and get back to regulation? It is through bringing awareness to our behaviors and beliefs, bringing awareness to what it is we are consuming. And also, we can stimulate the vagus nerve to begin to open those three channels and to begin to sense those three intelligence centers and then begin to move with intention and actual regulation through the current situation or through our day.
It's always, I think this is the one of the thing the Enneagram stands for the most, is this counterintuitive approach. The way the way we're approaching it when we're stuck in that rumination piece is not how we get out of it. We have to go in a different direction and seek resources in a different way.
And it is the hardest work because our brains are made to survive, and they think they're doing an efficient job because they built all of these networks.
Mm,
It thinks, oh no, I'm not going to do something that's not familiar. That's going to be way too efficient and way too difficult and uncomfortable. And I do not, we can't do that. That definitely won't work.
mm,
And we learned from a very young age that won't work. But all of this work is recovering our full authentic selves, right? So it's
mm,
begin to build back and bring online all of these networks that we pruned away because we got messages that wasn't safe or that wouldn't work for us.
mm.
Yeah.
And it takes such a leap of courage. We talked about this earlier. All of us need courage to do that different thing. The thing that all of our patterns and programming and our ego and our brain is saying, no, don't do that. When actually it's the thing that would break the cycle.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like B and Urania have said this, and I totally agree. If we only had the wisdom of the intelligence centers,
Mm,
we'd still grow tremendously. I feel like it can be such a source of wisdom and miscommunication. So I mean, I think it can be incredibly healing when you just focus on centers of intelligence work.
mm.
There's years and years of work to do when it comes to just that.
I know. And it's so easy to forget how powerful all three centers are and how hard it is to bring all of them on, like how much focus and attention it takes to bring them all online. Um,
Absolutely.
and a supportive environment.
And like just practically, because I think a lot of people are always like, okay, but like practically, what are the
Mm,
practices can do to open these centers up? I think body work can be, sometimes it's anything physical. Sometimes it is like actual exercise. It is like waking up your body
Mm.
sometimes. Oh, I think that is appropriate when you're in a place where you feel safe enough. If we're talking like trauma work around body center, then there is emotional release work that I haven't done, but I'm like so interested in doing. I would say somatic experiencing is both body and heart opening. What else would you add to body?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because it can be so many things. Like it can be as simple as like having a bath or having a massage or getting your hands in the dirt and doing some
Massage.
gardening or going doing pottery or knitting. Like I was really stressed with one job and I hate knitting, but all I did was knit for months on end to help regulate. And so I think it can be anything physical. I think doing exercise is useful, but it needs to be intentional. So if you're going for a walk, how could you make that more an intentional walk? How can you take
Yes.
out the podcast and just try and be really present?
Look around. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can bring in some of the type elements and go, right, would I benefit from boxing or weightlifting or gymnastics or, the other pieces if we layer that in. But movement, there's a lot of movement in it. And with somatic experiencing, having worked with a few different practitioners, I find they all have their slightly different approach for it. Like some
Yeah.
more somatic, some more of a combination of the two. So I think it's just finding someone that sort of works well for you and where you're at in that space. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I think feel like there can be a lot of overlap between the centers, but with heart, I say journaling is a really heart opening activity. Yoga can definitely be that. I don't know about you, but there have been plenty of yoga classes that at the end I'm in a puddle of tears. Listening to music, watching movies, spending time with people you love can be heart opening, dreaming, and writing intentions, envisioning exercises is a heart opening. Dreaming about your purpose, that comes from a heart space.
Mm.
I think a lot of people have a hard time dreaming if they are not a heart centered individual. I
I've
do a
always
lot of
found
those.
values work really hard.
Yeah,
I've done
exactly. Yeah.
so many values exercises, and I go
Yeah.
just within minutes of leaving the workshop, I've forgotten what I even wrote. It's like it
Yeah.
just doesn't stick. The only
Yeah.
time it stuck was when I used Brené Brown's Dare to Lead values exercise, and you had to pick one. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
once I had the one, it stuck. But that was the first
I love
time.
that. Yeah, I love that. That's a really good takeaway. Like, just pick one, you know.
Mm.
And then, waking up that head center, I think meditation, honestly, even though it can work on all three, I think it can be really cleansing,
Mm.
and open up the channels to allow for more flow up into the headspace. Breath work again can like be opening up the body, but it's also like waking up the mind and allowing for more free flowing. But then those practices of like, is this true? I think that is a really, really powerful practice. And also planning exercises, like actually sitting down and planning. Sevens think they're planners. And it's like the inefficient planning, right? So it's like, okay, how do we learn? Like we were talking about the efficient use of the head.
Hmm.
So actually sitting down and looking at the monthly calendar and planning out detailed and sticking to that plan instead of just dreaming up the plan in our head and our imagination, but putting it pen to paper. What else
Mm.
would you say about head?
I think it was so funny that you said planning because in my mind, I'm like, oh, we could just design a garden, you know? And all that meant was drawing what it was going to look like. There was
Uh-huh.
no planning for resources and the shopping and the planting and there was none of that. It was just making
Yeah.
a pretty picture about it. But I think grappling with spreadsheets, doing financial planning and budgeting, looking at our bank accounts, managing money, and then puzzles like Sudoku and crosswords and
Yes.
those sort of analytical puzzles or games
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can really help, play with that center.
Totally. Anything that's going to stimulate that intellectual center. I'm just kind of giggling inside because my husband is a four, just like, wants that stuff.
Right.
Kate as a four can't be bothered with
Uh-huh.
it, and if he hates making decisions, right? Like, because it requires him to use, turn on that head center. And he just
Mhm.
loves being right in this heart space. Like,
Mm.
do not drag me out of this cozy little spot, which is true
Mhm.
for all of us. But as a head type, sometimes I just tired. I don't want to use this noggin anymore. Can you please do the heavy lifting? Because my head, that picture of that statue, the head that's so
Oh,
massive,
yes.
just like that's how I feel all the time. My head's just gonna fall off my body.
But I don't think we realize how heavy our heads are until we start to notice how our body position, the tension in our necks and our shoulders, how we're so often leaning
Oh
forward.
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
just, yeah, this, oh my God, my
Oh
head's so
yeah.
heavy. I can't pick it up,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And even just
Totally.
seeing how here our centers are translated into our physical position and how we hold and use our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
There is such a connection between the biological and the psychological that I don't think we always are fully aware of.
I know. I know. It's so, as a head type would say, fascinating. I could just sit here and talk about these ideas with you all day long
All day. But
on
I'm
it.
glad we threw in some practical stuff that,
Yeah,
people can take away and use. It wasn't all theory.
I
We got
know.
a
I
good
know.
balance there.
Really, we're doing the work. We're really doing the work.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fascinating, and practical.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's just a joy to connect with you and get to, I don't know, walk alongside you in this work as you're also so passionate about helping people heal through the lens of the Enneagram. Just hope that
Mm.
we can keep supporting each other and helping to pave the way for more healing through the lens of the Enneagram.
Mm. Yes. Thank you.